It was 1980. Jimmy Carter was in the White House and Leonid Brezhnev led the Soviet Union, host of the Olympic Games. A significant moment unfolded there. It marked the final time a white male athlete claimed victory in the 100-meter dash. More strikingly, it was the last time any white man globally even qualified for those finals, an event that occurred 44 years ago. Observing many athletic arenas, particularly track and field, basketball, and American football, the prominence of black athletes is undeniable. So the question arises, why do black individuals appear to dominate in sports? And is this perception truly accurate? My aim here is to provide an honest perspective. This isn't about declaring any group superior or inferior, but rather exploring the observable differences by race in sports and the underlying reasons. First, we'll examine whether black athletes genuinely hold a dominant position across sports. Then we'll delve into the cultural distinctions at play. And finally, we'll scrutinize the genetic variations, exploring what science reveals and doesn't about inherited athletic aptitudes across different populations. Now let's explore the figures that sometimes make people uneasy. Are black individuals genuinely superior in sports? The answer is nuanced, depending heavily on the specific discipline. When we analyze professional sports, certain patterns are difficult to ignore. Approximately 3/4 of NBA players are black, within a nation where black individuals constitute roughly 13% of the population. In the NFL, nearly 2/3 of players are black, though these demographics shift by position. Cornerbacks and running backs are overwhelmingly black, while quarterbacks and kickers have historically been predominantly white, though this trend is evolving. In long-distance running, East African athletes, particularly from Kenya and Ethiopia, have absolutely dominated marathons for decades, with only 2 exceptions in the past 33 years. The Boston Marathon, for instance, has almost exclusively seen male winners from East Africa. However, shift your focus to swimming, and the picture changes entirely. At the 2016 Rio Olympics, 45 out of 50 finalists in the men's and women's 100-meter freestyle events were white. Black Americans are also notably underrepresented in sports such as tennis, golf, field hockey, archery, softball, and soccer. Black individuals account for only 5% of professional hockey players. The U.S. Figure Skating Association reported in 2022 that 73% of its members were white, 2% were black, and 18% were Asian. Speaking of Asian athletes, they've utterly excelled in table tennis, a trend that began in the 1950s when Chairman Mao declared it China's national sport. So it becomes quite evident that different racial groups tend to excel in and gravitate towards different sports. Women's gymnastics has historically been a domain of white and Eastern European athletes, but with talents like Simone Biles, arguably the greatest gymnast ever, the demographics of that sport, along with several others, are also undergoing a transformation. All right, now that we've highlighted some of these racial patterns in sports, let's explore their origins. One of the first areas to consider is the cultural elements that shape the racial composition of athletics. It's not as simple as innate ability. Consider the 1940s when black baseball players were confined to a segregated league. Once integration occurred, the sheer depth of previously sidelined talent became apparent. This integration fundamentally reshaped the entire sports landscape. As certain sports became more accessible to minority groups, they evolved into cultural touchstones. Basketball, for instance, became a beacon of aspiration in many black communities. All one truly needed to improve was a court, easily found even in dense urban areas, and a ball. The game requires no expensive equipment or vast fields. Then there's the lure of potential income. For many children growing up in impoverished neighborhoods, sports aren't just a pastime, they represent a potential pathway out of poverty. When surrounded by economic hardship, an NBA or NFL contract can be life-changing, and the economic incentives aren't solely for the players. Entire communities often rally around local athletes who show promise of making it to the big leagues. A successful athlete becomes not only a source of local pride, but also an investment for their hometown. It's clear that in some communities, specific sports are deeply embedded in the fabric of daily life. Think of how soccer is intricately woven into Latin American cultures. This cultural emphasis creates a feedback loop. The more a community values a sport, the more children play it. The more they play, the better they become. And the better they become, the more the community values it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that can shape generations of athletes. There's also immense power in seeing someone who looks like you succeed. Role models can be game changers. If you witness heroes who share your background winning competitions and earning substantial incomes, you're more likely to envision yourself in that role. Sometimes we all need someone to demonstrate what's truly possible. Inspiration is a potent force. So when Simone Biles emerged as a gymnastics powerhouse, the number of black girls taking up the sport surged. However, this effect can be complex. When Tiger Woods burst onto the golf scene, there was an initial spike in interest among ethnic minorities. Yet since then, those numbers have declined, likely due to the sport's high cost and the insufficient infrastructure to easily enable children from underprivileged communities to participate. Now consider snow skiing, a sport predominantly represented by white athletes at the professional and Olympic levels, overwhelmingly won by athletes from wealthier nations with abundant snow. In these countries, skiing is deeply ingrained culturally, supported by robust youth development programs and easy access to facilities. Still, regardless of the cultural context, it remains an expensive pursuit. The cost of equipment, training, and access to slopes often necessitates significant financial backing from families or communities for athletes to reach elite levels. Ski resorts and facilities are frequently located far from urban centers, where minority populations in the United States tend to be concentrated. But we can't attribute everything to money. Norwegians, for instance, dominate Olympic sports like cross-country skiing and speed skating, activities they can pursue right outside their front doors. Families cross-country ski and skate together, with children starting as soon as they can walk. It's fundamentally ingrained in their culture, which in turn reinforces the role model effect. A lack of diversity in skiing and other winter sports makes it harder for minority youth to envision themselves participating. Just as some sports ignite an entire community's passion, others generate little interest in regions that haven't traditionally embraced them. This is an intricate interplay of cultural and economic forces. Okay, now let's delve into what many consider the most contentious piece of this puzzle: genetics. This is where discussions often become quite intriguing and frequently a bit awkward. It's crucial to proceed with caution here. Arguing that different racial groups possess inherently different genetics can lead to deeply harmful beliefs and ideologies. However, it's equally illogical to assert that there are no physical differences between people from various parts of the world. We should be discerning enough to explore this topic without succumbing to discomfort or misinterpretation. Yet that is often not the case. You know that recurring Jimmy the Greek moment in sports, happening every few years, where some 50-something-year-old white guy attempts to explain why black athletes are excelling over white athletes in virtually every major sport? And it always plays out the same way. 20 minutes later, that guy's on TV, fired, possibly tearful, carrying a box of personal effects, an Emmy perhaps poking out, saying, "I don't know what I said, I was just talking about fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers." Anyway, this is a good moment to mention that if I make any factual errors in this video, I'll correct it in a pinned comment below, assuming I'm not dismissed by sundown. So, are there genetic differences between racial groups that contribute to athletic performance? Yes, of course, but it's complex. Overall, there's actually more genetic diversity within racial groups than between them. However, this doesn't negate the existence of genetic variations that tend to cluster in certain populations. Scientists have observed that specific genetic traits can offer advantages in particular sports. For example, many elite sprinters of West African descent exhibit a higher proportion of fast-twitch muscle fibers, which are vital for explosive power. These fibers contract rapidly but fatigue more quickly, making them ideal for short bursts of speed. Conversely, East African runners, especially from Kenya and Ethiopia, dominate long-distance events. Some researchers suggest this might be less about their muscle composition and more about their slim build and long legs relative to their height. which enhances running efficiency. A 2010 study in the International Journal of Design and Nature even proposed that black athletes possess a 1.5% speed advantage in running, because their center of mass is approximately 3% higher off the ground than white athletes, supposedly allowing for quicker forward falls between strides. While this sounds scientific, many other scientists remain skeptical of such a clear-cut explanation. Another controversial hypothesis among some scientists links the prevalence of sickle cell trait among people of West African origin to a higher percentage of fast twitch muscle fibers, but this hasn't garnered substantial concrete evidence. On the other hand, consider the relative scarcity of Asian athletes in sprinting events. Some researchers attribute this to body proportions, suggesting these populations generally have shorter limbs relative to their torso length, which could impede sprinting. Again, these are theories and precise testing remains challenging. Finally, let's not overlook the role of epigenetics. Epigenetics examines how an athlete's body responds to training, recovers from injuries, and reacts to different environmental conditions. It suggests that while genetics might provide some individuals with an edge, the expression of these genes can be influenced by factors like training, diet, and even an athlete's mindset. This could partially explain why athletes from certain regions excel in certain sports. It might not just be the genes themselves, but how those genes interact with their environment and lifestyle. And let's not forget that genes that help in a particular sport could be a disadvantage in another. The body type that's ideal for a marathon runner is very different from what you'd want for an offensive tackle. So when reviewing the research, it's clear there's no simple definitive answer. These relationships are the subject of scientific inquiry, but they remain largely unsettled. Still, undeniable characteristics emerge in many elite athletes that appear more frequently in certain populations than others. Of course, all of this prompts a larger question. As a society, should we be attempting to alter the racial composition of athletic competitions? Certainly, making all sports financially accessible to every child is a commendable objective, but merely observing the skin color of winners or participants complicates matters significantly. Sports are full of exceptions to every rule. It may simply be a fact that some racial groups excel in certain sports, and that isn't inherently negative. Just a reality with some fascinating reasons behind it. It's similar to what I discovered when I tried to understand why Arab armies almost consistently seem to lose against Western powers. In fact, the last time an Arab regime won a major battle against the West was in 1187 AD. And just like in sports, the answers are intricate. Thanks for joining me. I genuinely enjoy researching these topics and sharing what I learn. I strive for fairness and hope you'll return for more. Take care.